January 17, 1945. The winter wind bit through the shattered walls of a makeshift field hospital somewhere in the Ardennes. Inside, the air was thick with the metallic tang of blood, antiseptic, and smoke drifting faintly from nearby artillery fire. Flickering lanterns cast shadows across pale, anxious faces, soldiers and medics alike, racing against time. On a stretcher lay a young German woman, barely 20, her uniform torn, her hand mangled beyond recognition. Every shallow breath trembled with fear. Nurses whispered hurried instructions, instruments clinking against steel trays, as the American surgeon stepped forward, eyes steady but mind sharp, calculating every motion. Outside, distant explosions punctuated the tense silence, reminding everyone that the front was never far. "They'll cut it off," she whispered in broken German, voice trembling. Her eyes, wide with desperation, locked on the surgeon, silently pleading. 4 hours could mean the difference between losing her hand, and with it, a part of herself, or surviving intact. In the midst of war, a battle unlike any other was about to unfold on a small, operating table. By early 1945, the war in Europe was approaching its final, desperate stages. The Ardennes forest, scarred by the Battle of the Bulge months earlier, still bore the remnants of frozen mud, shattered trees, and abandoned vehicles. German forces, already stretched thin, were retreating along multiple fronts, attempting to regroup in the face of overwhelming Allied advances. American and British units pressed relentlessly, their artillery and armored divisions cutting off pockets of resistance. In the chaos, many German soldiers and civilians alike found themselves surrounded, disoriented, and at the mercy of advancing forces. Among those captured were women attached to auxiliary units, nurses, and support personnel. Female POWs, though fewer in number, were treated under the Geneva Conventions, yet the conditions were austere. Housing was rudimentary, cold barracks, sometimes tents or commandeered buildings, where hygiene was minimal and food often scarce. Medical attention was available but prioritized based on severity of injury and military necessity. For those with life-threatening wounds, survival often depended on the proximity of a functional field hospital and the skill of its staff. American field hospitals in late 1944 and early 1945 were designed for mobility and rapid response. Equipped with makeshift operating rooms, sterilization units, and stretchers, they were staffed by teams of surgeons, nurses, and orderlies who worked under extreme pressure. Protocols emphasized triage, infection control, and rapid surgical intervention. Operating rooms were cramped, lit by kerosene lamps or minimal electric power, and filled with the constant background of radios broadcasting frontline reports and distant artillery. Every decision mattered, every second could mean the difference between life and death. It was in one such hospital that a young German woman, captured after being separated from her unit, was brought in with a grievous hand injury. Her journey from the forest to the hospital had been fraught with fear and uncertainty, a reflection of the larger collapse of the German defensive lines. The medical teams, trained to see beyond nationality, prepared to stabilize her, unaware that the injuries she carried would test both their skill and their humanity. The stage was set. The war pressed on outside, but inside the field hospital, another battle loomed, one not against enemy soldiers, but against the relentless toll of war on the human body. Wartime field hospitals faced injuries of staggering variety and severity. Shrapnel from artillery, gunshot wounds, frostbite, burns, and crushed limbs were daily realities. Surgeons worked in conditions far removed from the safety of civilian operating rooms, improvised tables, flickering lights, and the constant drone of distant shells forming an unrelenting backdrop. Infection was the deadliest enemy, often more lethal than the initial injury. Antibiotics such as penicillin were available, but supplies were limited, requiring careful rationing and skillful application. Surgical procedures in the 1940s, especially in the field, demanded both speed and precision. Amputation was a common solution for severe injuries, particularly when bones were shattered or blood vessels irreparably damaged. Limb-saving surgeries were technically possible but required prolonged operations, meticulous suturing, and careful post-operative care, luxuries often constrained by the pace of battle. Surgeons had to improvise constantly, repurposing instruments, sterilizing under suboptimal conditions, and managing anesthesia with limited resources. The men and women performing these surgeries were rigorously trained, yet the battlefield demanded adaptability above all. Many had graduated from civilian hospitals before being commissioned into the Army Medical Corps. Their skills ranged from trauma surgery to orthopedics, often honed through months of emergency wartime experience. Nurses and orderlies formed an essential extension of this expertise, managing instruments, monitoring vitals, and maintaining sterile fields under relentless pressure. It was in this environment that an American surgeon, Captain William H. surname, *, came to the bedside of the injured German woman. Experienced in both trauma and reconstructive procedures, he had already faced countless cases of crushed extremities and mangled hands. Yet the complexity of her injury, a near-total destruction of the hand, with bones splintered and tendons severed, would push even his considerable skill to its limits. His preparation was meticulous, instruments cleaned and arranged, sutures ready, anesthesia assessed, and assistance briefed. The challenge ahead was more than technical. Saving her hand required not just steady hands and sharp eyes, but also patience, endurance, and an unwavering commitment to her survival despite her enemy status. Every decision would carry weight. One misstep could mean permanent loss of the limb, or worse. Outside, the war raged on, but inside the sterile, dimly lit room, the focus narrowed to one goal: preserving life, restoring function, and asserting the fragile humanity that persisted even amid war's destruction. The scene was set for a battle unlike any fought on the front lines, a 4-hour surgical struggle, pitting skill against injury, precision against desperation. From here, the story unfolds through the human, technological, and moral dimensions that define this extraordinary act of wartime medicine. The young German woman lay on the operating table, her mangled hand wrapped in blood-stained cloth. Fear etched every line of her face. She had seen comrades fall, civilians caught in the crossfire, and now, her own body threatened to betray her. The word amputation hovered over her mind like a guillotine. Every heartbeat carried terror, every breath a reminder that she was far from safety, far from anyone who could comfort her. POWs often faced this relentless uncertainty, trapped between captors' authority and the unpredictable outcomes of battlefield medicine. Her despair was tangible, a silent scream that reverberated through the sterile room. Yet in that fear, a fragile thread of hope persisted: the surgeon's calm presence, his steady hands, and the promise of a chance, however slim, to retain her hand anchored her trembling spirit. War had stripped away normalcy, but here, in this tense stillness, humanity lingered, fragile but defiant. Field hospitals were marvels of organization under pressure. Tents and commandeered buildings became operating theaters, crammed with stretchers, instrument trays, and cots. Sterilization units were makeshift, often reliant on boiling water or portable autoclaves. Lights flickered from minimal electricity, forcing surgeons to work in half-shadows. Outside, artillery fire reminded all present that safety was relative. Risks were constant: infection from unsterile surfaces, limited supplies, and the ever-present threat of nearby combat. Every procedure required improvisation. Instruments were reused with careful sterilization, anesthesia was rationed, and nurses doubled as logisticians and trauma specialists. Every surgery carried the risk that a sudden bombardment could interrupt it, or that a supply shortage could force a critical decision. In such conditions, saving a hand, a life, or even a chance at recovery demanded precision, resilience, and an almost ritualistic adherence to order amid chaos. Surgical techniques in the 1940s relied on a combination of knowledge, dexterity, and improvisation. Limb-saving procedures involved meticulous suturing of blood vessels and tendons, often with fine silk thread, and careful alignment of shattered bones. Prosthetics existed, but they were rudimentary, making successful reconstruction invaluable. Instruments were basic: scalpels, forceps, bone saws, and clamps, yet in skilled hands, they achieved remarkable results. Anesthesia, typically ether or chloroform, required constant monitoring, especially when prolonged surgeries stretched over hours. Blood loss was managed with cross-matching when possible, or direct transfusions from donors in rare cases. For this young woman, the surgeon's ability to combine technical knowledge with improvisation determined whether her hand would survive. Every incision, every stitch, was a test of precision, endurance, and the limits of wartime medicine. The human struggle intertwined with technical mastery, creating a tense, delicate balance that would define the outcome. The surgeon bore the weight of responsibility in a war zone. Every decision, where to cut, how to stabilize, whether to attempt reconstruction, carried life-altering consequences. Beyond technical skill, he faced a moral calculus. His patient was an enemy, yet his duty was to preserve life impartially. Leadership in such moments demanded calm decisiveness, unwavering focus, and the courage to defy the rush of battle in order to protect the vulnerable. Orders from above emphasized triage, but the humanity of the surgeon often transcended regulations. Choosing to commit hours to save a hand might seem minor in the context of global war, yet it was monumental for the individual. Ethical commitment became as critical as surgical precision, creating a theater of courage, compassion, and professionalism in the midst of chaos. Under international conventions, enemy POWs were entitled to humane treatment and medical care. The Geneva Convention outlined standards, yet compliance varied widely. In practice, survival often hinged on the skill and integrity of medical personnel. Here, medical ethics overrode animosity. The injured German woman was treated not as an enemy, but as a patient whose suffering demanded intervention. The system allowed for this rare convergence of duty and compassion, a battlefield law of humanity. In the field hospital, nationality dissolved into vulnerability. The surgeon's hands became instruments of impartial mercy, demonstrating that even in total war, moral obligation could persist, shaping individual lives and setting enduring examples of ethical action. The operating table was cold beneath the woman's trembling body. Her hand, mangled beyond recognition, lay splayed in a pool of coagulated blood. The American surgeon, eyes sharp and hands steady, moved methodically, assessing each shattered bone, each severed tendon. Nurses worked silently, exchanging instruments with practiced precision, their faces pale beneath stained caps. The faint hum of lanterns combined with the distant echoes of artillery, a constant reminder that the front had not forgiven anyone. The first incision revealed the extent of the damage: tissue torn, vessels ruptured, bone fragments misaligned. The surgeon's mind calculated every move, planning the reconstruction step by step. Improvised clamps held fragile structures in place, and sutures, fine and delicate, were threaded with meticulous care. Blood pressure dropped at intervals. The nurses monitored her vitals with relentless attention, adjusting anesthesia and administering fluids to keep her stable. Every second mattered. Time became elastic. Minutes stretched as the surgeon worked, cutting, aligning, and stitching. Instruments were cleaned and reused under hurried sterilization. Trays were rearranged in mid-procedure as the limited equipment demanded constant adaptation. The woman's fear was palpable, visible in every quiver and shallow breath, yet she remained silent, eyes wide, fixed on the ceiling. For the surgeon, it was a battle of precision against chaos. Hands, instruments, and nerves intertwined in a delicate choreography. Every decision, whether to attempt a tendon repair or replace a bone fragment with a graft, carried the weight of permanent consequence. Outside, the war raged, but inside this small, dimly lit room, victory was measured in millimeters, in the survival of tissue, in the restoration of function. Hours passed, measured in meticulous movements. Sweat beaded the surgeon's brow, but his focus never wavered. The team anticipated his next steps without instruction, a silent symphony of coordination. Improvisation was constant, stretching sutures, repurposing instruments, adapting techniques to the limitations of a field hospital. And as the operation approached its critical phase, the line between life and permanent loss of the hand became razor-thin. The stage was set for a moment where skill, endurance, and compassion would converge. One final series of sutures, one careful alignment of bones, one precise ligature, and the outcome of 4 hours of relentless effort would be revealed. After 4 grueling hours, the surgeon leaned back slightly, surveying the work. The shattered bones were aligned, tendons meticulously repaired, and blood vessels restored. The hand, though swollen and bruised, retained its shape and potential function. For the first time since the injury, there was a sense of possibility, an unspoken victory over the chaos of war and the destructive power of injury. The woman's breathing deepened. She opened her eyes, searching for confirmation, and upon seeing the surgeon's steady gaze, tears welled and spilled down her cheeks. Relief, disbelief, and gratitude mingled in a silent expression that spoke louder than words ever could. Nurses allowed themselves brief smiles, tension easing as they cleaned instruments and prepared for recovery care. The room, once a theater of relentless intensity, softened into a space where human resilience and skill converged. The significance of this moment extended beyond the individual. In a field hospital constrained by limited supplies, rudimentary instruments, and constant external threats, the successful restoration of a nearly destroyed hand was extraordinary. It exemplified the potential of wartime medicine when expertise, improvisation, and ethical commitment intersected. Every stitch, every careful adjustment, had preserved not just tissue, but dignity, hope, and the promise of functional life. The surgeon recorded notes meticulously, detailing the steps taken, the techniques used, and the patient's response. This case would become a reference for future field procedures, a testament to what could be achieved even under the harshest conditions. Beyond the technical achievement, it demonstrated the humanity that could persist amidst the brutality of conflict, the ability to treat an enemy with the same dedication as a comrade, to place life and skill above ideology and hatred. In the immediate aftermath, the woman's hand was carefully bandaged and supported. Nurses monitored circulation, temperature, and pulse, ensuring that the delicate reconstruction remained intact. She grasped the edge of the stretcher, feeling the contours of her restored hand, a sensation she had feared lost forever. Around her, the hospital staff moved with renewed purpose, aware that this small victory, though isolated, was a powerful reminder of the impact of their labor in a war defined by destruction. Outside, the distant thrum of artillery continued, a stark contrast to the fragile triumph within the operating room. The battle raged, lives were lost, and cities fell, yet in this corner of the Ardennes, 4 hours of skill, perseverance, and compassion had rewritten the trajectory of one life. From here, the story naturally turns to the aftermath, the consequences for the patient, the surgeon, and the broader system of wartime medical care, where every success carried weight far beyond the operating table. In the days following the operation, the young German woman remained under close observation. Her hand, heavily bandaged and elevated, gradually began to regain color and warmth, signs that circulation had been successfully restored. Pain was managed with careful doses of analgesics, though every movement reminded her of the trauma she had endured. Nurses encouraged gentle exercises, cautiously flexing fingers under supervision, while the surgeon monitored healing, ensuring no infection or tissue necrosis would undo hours of painstaking work. Hospital records from POW units of the period note similar cases, though few achieved such outcomes. The meticulous documentation praised the dedication of medical personnel who, despite scarcity of resources and overwhelming patient loads, prioritized limb-saving procedures whenever possible. Memoirs from both nurses and surgeons of the era recount the emotional weight of treating enemy prisoners, the uncertainty, the moral responsibility, and the relief when a patient's recovery exceeded expectations. For the medical staff, each small triumph served as a reaffirmation of purpose amidst the relentless tide of casualties. Captain William H., the surgeon, reflected privately on the operation. He recognized that the success of the procedure was a convergence of skill, preparation, and improvisation under extreme conditions. Yet beyond the technical victory, he found profound meaning in the emotional response of his patient, her gratitude, her relief, the unmistakable spark of hope returning to her eyes. Morale within the field hospital, already fragile under continuous strain, received an unexpected boost. This act became more than medicine. It was a testament to the persistence of humanity in an environment defined by destruction. By the end of the first week, she was able to move her fingers slightly, a signal that nerves and tendons were beginning to function. Fellow POWs, initially wary of the hospital staff, witnessed her small but remarkable progress. The operation became a quiet legend within the unit, a reminder that even amid suffering, extraordinary care could change the course of an individual's life. The successful restoration of the woman's hand left ripples far beyond her immediate recovery. Within military medical circles, such cases became valuable references for improving treatment protocols for POWs and injured civilians. Surgeons documented techniques, materials used, and procedural steps, creating guidance for future field hospitals. While amputation remained common for severe injuries, limb-saving operations were increasingly recognized as feasible under carefully managed conditions. Each successful case reinforced the notion that even under extreme wartime constraints, medical skill and innovation could yield extraordinary results. The event also highlighted the moral dimensions of wartime medicine. Treating an enemy soldier, or in this case, a young female POW, with meticulous care challenged the prevailing narrative of impersonal hostility. Reports and memoirs from Allied medical personnel emphasized that acts of compassion did more than save limbs. They preserved dignity, fostered trust, and strengthened adherence to international conventions. The surgeon's dedication became an exemplar of how ethics and professionalism could coexist with efficiency, speed, and battlefield necessity. For the POW system, the operation served as a quiet but powerful reminder that humane treatment was not merely a legal obligation but a practical one. Proper medical care improved survival, morale, and long-term outcomes for prisoners, reducing the burden on limited resources and reinforcing compliance with Geneva Convention standards. The story of the hand, meticulously restored against daunting odds, became a symbol within the units, a testament to the human capacity for empathy even amidst the machinery of war. In broader terms, military medical practices evolved in response to such successes. Field surgeons increasingly focused on preserving function, not merely life. Training programs incorporated lessons learned from challenging cases, and surgical improvisation under pressure was recognized as a critical skill. The operation exemplified the intersection of knowledge, adaptability, and ethical responsibility, demonstrating that combat medicine could transcend the mere technical and touch the deeply human. As the young woman gradually regained mobility and confidence, the significance of those 4 hours in the operating room crystallized. Her survival and recovery stood as proof that, even in a world defined by destruction and division, care, skill, and moral courage could alter the trajectory of a life. The battlefield, for a brief and extraordinary moment, had yielded not only survival, but also hope, a bridge from immediate suffering to enduring meaning. This quiet triumph now leads naturally into reflection, where, in the quiet aftermath of war, amid ruined villages and shattered forests, the restored hand of a young German woman became more than a medical triumph, it became a symbol. 4 hours of meticulous labor, of patience and unwavering focus, transcended the immediate chaos of battle. It was a moment where skill met compassion, where the machinery of war was paused to honor the fragility and resilience of human life. The surgeon's hands, guided by knowledge and conscience, had navigated not only tissue and bone, but also the profound moral terrain of treating an enemy with dignity. The patient, trembling yet alive with possibility, embodied the human capacity to endure and hope. Their encounter, brief and extraordinary, illuminated a truth often lost in the noise of conflict, that even amidst destruction, acts of care could reclaim fragments of humanity. History often records battles, strategies, and losses. Yet in this small operating room in the Ardennes, a different story was written, one of quiet heroism and ethical courage. The hand that would move, grasp, and eventually heal, carried with it the memory of that day, of the choices made under pressure, and of the enduring link between knowledge, empathy, and action. It stands as a reminder that war is not defined solely by what is destroyed, but also by the rare moments where skill, conscience, and compassion intersect. A single act, measured in hours and inches, can echo through history, proving that even in the darkest times, humanity